Dr. Adrian Locke was a brilliant man, no doubt about it. He had published groundbreaking research on human cognition and neural interfaces, and his name was known in academic circles around the world. But brilliance can be a dangerous thing when it goes unchecked, and there was always something unsettling about Dr. Locke's obsession with the boundaries of the human mind. I was one of his research assistants, a low-level grad student who was thrilled at the opportunity to work with someone so prestigious. I didn't know then what that would cost me. The project was simple enough at first. Dr. Locke was developing a device that could map the brain in real time down to the smallest neural impulse. The goal was to create a perfect representation of human thought, something that could visualize memories, emotions, even abstract concepts as they occurred in the brain. He believed this would revolutionize neuroscience and pave the way for everything from memory transplants to curing mental illness. At least, that was the official goal. What he didn't tell us was that he had a second, much darker objective. He wanted to see if it was possible to record a person's consciousness, not just their thoughts, but their very being, and not just record it, but transfer it somewhere else. A person's mind, their soul, if you believe in that kind of thing, placed into a digital space, an eternal prison or paradise depending on how you saw it. Dr. Locke never directly said any of this, of course, but it became clearer as the months went on. I started noticing the way he talked about preserving consciousness, his casual mentions of defying death and offhand remarks. At first, I thought it was just his ego. He was eccentric, sure, but most geniuses are. Then, things started getting strange. It was late one night when I found him in the lab, long after everyone else had gone home. I had forgotten my notebook and came back to retrieve it. The lights were dim, the computers humming softly, and there he was, sitting at his desk, staring intently at a monitor. At first, I didn't want to disturb him, but as I approached, I realized what he was looking at: brain scans. Not just any scans, though, they were in real time. The lines and waves on the screen represented a living brain, firing off electrical impulses, thoughts forming and fading, synapses lighting up like stars. But the brain wasn't a model, and it wasn't from one of the test subjects. It was his brain. He had hooked himself up to the machine. "Dr. Locke?" I asked, my voice hesitant. He didn't respond immediately, but after a few moments, he turned to look at me, a strange, almost feverish gleam in his eyes. "Do you know what's like, Harper?" he asked, his voice soft, almost reverent. "To see your own thoughts laid bare before you? To know that every emotion, every memory, is nothing but a collection of impulses? To see everything you are?" I didn't know what to say. He wasn't talking to me anymore. Not really. He was lost in whatever he was seeing on that screen. "It's not enough," he whispered. "It's not enough to see it. I need to become it." I left the lab that night with a gnawing sense of unease, but I convinced myself that Dr. Locke was just pushing the limits of his work, as any great scientist would. I told myself it was just a glimpse of the intensity that had made him a genius. But things only got worse after that. Dr. Locke began to isolate himself, spending long hours in the lab alone. He rarely spoke to anyone outside of curt instructions, and his appearance grew more and more disheveled. Dark circles formed under his eyes, and his skin took on a pale, almost sickly hue. Rumors started circulating among the staff, whispers of bizarre experiments and unethical practices. One night, I stayed late to finish some paperwork and saw him carrying something into the back room. It was a small metal device about the size of a helmet, bristling with wires and electrodes. I had seen it before. Locke had been working on it for weeks, but I had no idea what it was for. Curiosity got the better of me, and I followed him at a distance. He went into one of the secured testing chambers, and as I peeked through the small observation window, I saw him place the device on his own head. There was a quiet hum as the machine powered on, and Locke sat down in a chair, his body rigid, eyes wide open. I watched in horror as his face twisted into a grotesque expression, part agony, part ecstasy. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. His hands twitched violently, gripping the arms of the chair so hard his knuckles turned white. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the machine clicked off. Dr. Locke slumped forward, gasping for breath, the helmet falling to the floor with a metallic clatter. I backed away from the door, my heart racing, unsure of what I had just witnessed. I wanted to confront him, to ask him what the hell was going on, but fear kept me silent. The next day, Dr. Locke announced that the experiment was nearing completion. A week later, the first real test subject arrived, a convicted criminal, a death row inmate who had been donated for scientific research in exchange for a reduced sentence. The ethics of it were questionable, but I didn't say anything. None of us did. We all knew something was wrong, but Locke had too much power, too much prestige for anyone to challenge him. The inmate was strapped into the chair, electrodes placed carefully on his scalp. The device, the one Locke had tested on himself, was positioned on his head. The room was silent, save for the faint hum of the machinery. Locke stood behind the glass, a look of cold determination on his face. He pressed a few keys on the terminal, and the machine whirred to life. The inmate's body tensed as the helmet activated, his face contorting in pain. His eyes rolled back into his head, his muscles spasming uncontrollably. Then, suddenly, everything went still. The machine powered down, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence. The inmate's body slumped in a chair, lifeless. "Did it work?" one of the other assistants asked, his voice trembling. Locke didn't answer. He simply stared at the monitor, watching the neural data flash across the screen. And then, slowly, the corners of his mouth curled into a smile that chilled me to the bone. "It worked," he whispered. "It worked." I didn't understand what had happened. Not until later. That night, I accessed the lab server. I shouldn't have, but I needed to know. What I found was worse than anything I could have imagined. Locke hadn't just recorded the man's brain activity. He had uploaded it, his entire consciousness, into a digital framework. The man was trapped, his mind still active, still thinking, still aware. The system showed the electrical impulses firing off, like a brain in a jar. But there was no body, just code. The man was screaming. The data log showed it over and over again, an endless loop of terror and confusion. But there was no sound, just cold, lifeless data on a screen. Locke had succeeded. He had captured a human soul, imprisoned it in a machine. I tried to confront him the next day, but when I entered the lab, something was wrong. Dr. Locke was nowhere to be found. The security cameras showed him entering the building that morning, but there was no record of him leaving. And then I saw it. The device, the helmet, was sitting on his desk, still plugged in. And on the monitor, a live feed of brain activity, Dr. Locke's brain activity. He had done it. He had uploaded himself. But as I stared at the screen, I realized something horrifying. The patterns were erratic, chaotic, nothing like the smooth waves of a functioning brain. It was as if his consciousness was breaking apart, fragmenting into pieces. And amidst the data, there was something else, something dark, a presence, a shadow moving within the code. Whatever Locke had unleashed, it wasn't just him anymore. And it was growing. Now the lab is closed. The project has been shut down, and no one speaks of what happened. But I still hear whispers in the system, faint and distorted. Late at night, when I'm alone in my apartment, I swear I can hear Locke's voice coming through the static, begging for release. But I know better. Whatever is in there now, it's not Locke, and it's waiting for someone to let it out.